the moredet is not the type of situations in the Talmud where we can force the husband to give a get. Now, generally, we don't force. There's something called get mu'useh, a forced get, and we are terrified of creating a forced get. Now, the Talmud itself says there are certain situations in which you can beat the husband until he says, I want to do what the rabbis say. Does anybody remember the list? Anybody remember the list?
He's impotent. Got a bad smell.
Michael?
He wouldn't, a person who doesn't give his wife a get, a recalcitrant husband,
Yeah, but
refuses sex.
In which cases can you beat him?
If he refuses to give a get.
Yeah.
No.
In which cases can you beat him if he refuses to give a get?
He smells bad.
If he has an evil smelling skin.
Oh, yeah.
If he has a problem, if he has a skin disease. Well, that's the stink. If he has a skin disease. If he is impotent. And if he is a total failure at supporting his wife. Rabbi Waldenberg added a fifth one, which is violence which threatens the woman's life. Okay? So, moredet is a different kettle of fish, a different cup of tea. Jack, please, the Talmud, line 4.
The Talmud, Ketubot, discusses two types of moredet, namely a wife who claims that she is unable to engage in conjugal relations with her husband because he is loathsome to her.
Ma'is alai. Now, what does that mean, loathsome to her? Only women possibly can explain that, but it's impossible for her to have relations with this man. Cannot stand him and cannot respond in any physical way positively to his presence next to her. Okay? Ma'is alai. That's one form of moredet. What is the other form?
And the wife who is generally able and willing to have sex with her husband, but refuses to engage in intercourse with him because she is punishing him for the way he treats her.
So that could be the Talmud says he hasn't spoken to her nicely. He has beat her. She is taking her revenge. Okay. So strictly speaking,
only in the latter case is the wife turned moredet.
Now, moredet means to rebel. Okay. Apparently, Gemara says that if she is angry with him and she manifests her anger by not having sex, that's not called a moredet. Moredet is principled, ongoing, rebelling against being married to this man. The woman, the second type of moredet, is not wanting to flee the marriage. She wants her husband to change. Okay, I'm not going to go into whether participants in the Shiur have experienced any of this sort of thing, but apparently that's how the Gemara sees it. Okay. Although the term
is used in halakhic literature to describe the former case as well.
So if you read the halakhic sources, you'll see that there is a difference. But generally, when we talk about moredet, we're not very careful, and we use it for both types of difficulty. Okay. Now, thank you, Jack. Michael Gillis, would you take over, please? Line 10, various financial sanctions.
Various financial sanctions against the moredet are mentioned in the Talmud, as is the issue of a get. Well,
now, the financial sanctions are to announce in shul. Imagine that every week. So-and-so is rebelling against her husband. She's now going to lose a part of her ketubah, a small fraction. Then the next week, same thing. The week after that. And then you could whittle it down, okay? By the way, there's also a mored. Did you know that? The male form. The same sanction, except that they add to his ketubah every week. He remains stubborn, gets added more money to the ketubah. So clearly we're using money as a sanction here, okay? Then there's also the question of a get. But, and here's the big but, Michael, line 11 of the sugya.
But the sugya lends itself to more than one interpretation. Hence, commentators on the Talmud disagree as to the law, and different practices arose in different communities.
So,
Rambam, Hilchot Ishut,
chapter 14, if you're going to read it, finish it off.
chapter 14, Tur and Shulchan Aruch, Even HaEzer, 77.
So, it's not quite clear from the Gemara what we do with a moredet. The Gemara mentions financial sanctions. It also mentions a get. It mentions 12 months of pressure and giving a get after that. It's not quite clear whether you can force the husband or not force the husband. So the light of all of these differences, we don't have to go into the sugya at any great depth, but we're going to focus on the tshuva of Harav Shiur Gaon. 906 to 1006. How long did he live?
100
years. 100. Okay. So he lived a while. He was the Gaon of Pumbedita. Now, Gaon, in our sense, means the Rosh Yeshiva, the head of the yeshiva. You may remember we talked about the fact that during the Yarchei Kala, the Rosh Yeshiva would preside over a huge brains trust. Questions arrived from all over the Jewish world, and he would be the one who signed on the official answers and also got the money. Now, Shiur Gaon was in fact a member of the family of the Reish Galuta, the exilarch, which is not quite the Rosh Yeshiva or the Gaon or even the Av Beit Din. But he made a professional move from being a member of the exilarch family, which traced its ancestors to King David, as he tells us in Igeret Shiur Gaon, to being the head of the yeshiva. He started off as Av Beit Din, and he became the Gaon or head of the yeshiva in 968. He was also claimed to be a descendant of Rabbah, the Amorah, who was himself a Talmud of Rav, and Rav is the bridge between Eretz Israel and Babel. Rav or Abba Arika, he brought Eretz Israel and its whole tradition to Babylon. Now, Rav Shiur Gaon is the penultimate Gaon. According to Raivad Sefer HaKabbalah, he is the one before the last, okay, of the true Gaonim of Babel. There were Gaonim in Eretz Israel, as we learned when we studied the Rambam, there were Gaonim in Baghdad, but they were a pale reflection of what happened in Babylon in the Gaonic period. So Rav Shiur was a very powerful personality indeed. He wrote his Igeret Rav Shiur Gaon and actually got into a bit of trouble. The Khalifa was informed by nasty people that this Rav Shiur Gaon was plotting against him. Why? Because he was constantly getting letters from far-flung places, some of whom were at war with the Caliph of Baghdad. And what were these letters he was getting from all over the place?
Shelot.
The Shelot of the diaspora. So because he was so popular, because he was such a center of wisdom for the Jewish world, it landed him in a spot of bother. He was put in jail. It didn't do his health much good. And then he eventually moved aside for his son, who was the Av Beit Din, who basically did everything for him in the last 8 years of his life. Now, Shiur Gaon wrote many tshuvot, covering many fields, including history of halakha, theology, Kabbalah, and he also wrote Perushim on Torah and Talmud. We only know about them because they are cited in the works of others. Radak, from time to time, will cite Rav Shiur Gaon on Tanakh. So let's see what happened in the 10th century. Marcel, you're around, line 15.
In the 10th century, Rav Shiur Gaon, 1906 to 1006, wrote a responsum in which he describes the post-Talmudic developments regarding the moredet and concludes that for some 300 years the Geonim compelled the husband to divorce his Meredet wife immediately in all such cases and to pay her the ketubah. He advises his questioner to act similarly in his community.
Now that's quite revolutionary. First of all, we don't accept that the Moredet is a fit person to get Beddin to beat her husband into giving her a get. Secondly, the Moredet, according to one reading of the Talmud, doesn't get her ketubah. In fact, she loses it. Rav Shiur Gaon goes all out to do the best he can for the Moredet. Amazing. Let's read the tshuva, line 20. V'sheshaltem, and you asked, Isha shehi yoshevet tachal ba'ala va'amra lo garsheni. A woman, married woman, says to her husband, give me a divorce. Eini rotzeh leshev imach. I don't want to stay married to you. Haim chayav liten la klum miktubata o lo. Must he give her her ketubah? Kegon da havya moredet o lo, and is she a moredet? Tshuva. Kach ra'inu. Sheshurat adin hayta meikara. Remember, he was a historian of halakha. He says at the very beginning the din was she'en mechayvin et habal legaresh et ishto im tava gerushin. Such a wife, we do not compel the husband to divorce her. Chutz me'otan shamru raboteinu bahen shekufin oto lotzi in ketubot, except for the 4 cases, okay? The smell, the skin disease, the impotence, and a total lack of support. V'achar kach תקנו תקנה שיכריזו עליה 4 שבתות זו אחר זו ושולחים לה מבית דין. And then we mentioned what the Gemara says about the 4 Shabbatot. We declare her in shul. We say, look, so-and-so is a Moredet. And she's going to lose her ketubah. Hevei yodat shafilu ketubatech mea mana hifsat. Doesn't matter whether you get a ketubah of a mea or a mana, whatever it is, big or small, you'll lose it all. לסוף תקנו שמכריזין עליה 4 שבתות ומפסדת כולן. Then it was telescoped, get rid of the whole ketubah in one shot. ואף על פי כן, לא היו מחייבים את הבעל לכתוב לה גט. But there was no coercion on the husband to give her a get. והתקינו שמשין אותה בלא גירושין 12 חודש, שמא תתבייש. Later on, if you look at the sugya, there's a 12-month period, which Shiur Gaon says is another takana, that we wait and see. Like the cooling off period, go to family therapy. And then one reading, a meimar, in the Gemara, is that you actually do force the husband to give her a get. But it's not clear that there is a compulsion. It's only on one reading of one Amorah. ואחרי רבנן סבוראי בראותם שבנות ישראל הולכות ונוטלות בגויים ונתלות בגויים. Now what happened? The Saboraim came after the Geonim. And they saw, and this was in Eastern lands and Muslim lands, that Jewish wives who were unhappy with their husbands went and got a get by having a Muslim court beat the husband or tell him, unless he gives a get to his wife, he'll be in trouble. Umistapkin beget mu'useh, and there's a doubt because they're endangering themselves with the possibility of a get mu'useh, a forced get, the kanafik minei churva, and the results are terrible because if a woman gets a get where the husband has been forced to give, it's not a kosher get, and if she marries another Jew, her children from that Jew will be what?
Mamzerim.
Mamzerim. So we want to avoid that. Tiknu b'imei mar Rav Rabba bar Mar Hunai nishmato Eden. So in the days of the link between the Savoraim and the Geonim, Mar Rav Rabba bar Mar Hunai, they ruled that a moredet v'tovat gerushin shektubata v'chol nitzetzon barzel sheknisa lo yishalem. Husband pays everything he needs to pay. Everything that she brought into the marriage, she gets back and her ketubah. We don't wait 12 months immediately. She gets her get. We, the Geonim, have been doing this for over 300 years. You do it as well.
They don't necessarily get the get. They can tell him.
I am listening to what Debbie's saying, The fact that there was that the Gaonim, the Rav Shiur Gaon says, this is what we do. I assume it must have some effect, otherwise they wouldn't bother to say it. Okay, and remember, they could beat people if they wanted to. So once you, he has to say at some stage, I agree to do what the rabbis say. And apparently they did, it must have worked. Okay. By the way, why does beating him until he says Rotzani make it a get that is not mu'useh, not a compelled get? Surely you're beating him.
He says,
You're beating the Yetzer Hara out of him.
Exactly.
Mitzvah
Rambam.
לשמוע דברי חכמים.
Rambam famously says the guy actually wants to do what the rabbis say and he wants to give his wife a get. Only what's stopping him? It's Yetzer Hara. So you beat the Yetzer Hara out of him and then he gives the get purely voluntarily. Blood is streaming from his back, but he's saying, yes, I really want to do what the rabbis say because his Yetzer Hara has been beaten out of him. Excellent.
also because it hurt.
Well, that doesn't help. The hurt doesn't help. It's because we've helped him get over his Yetzer Hara. That was stopping him doing the right thing. Okay? And that's why it's not a get mu'useh. No, it doesn't hurt at all. You feel good. You're relieved of your Yetzer Hara. Imagine that. Well, anyhow, whatever. Line 31. Bernie, would you like to read?
There are, in fact, two ways of interpreting the Talmudic sugya. One is that the husband is compelled to divorce his wife after 12 months, and the other is that he's obliged to give her a divorce, but may not be compelled to do so. The innovation
is
of the
whether we
Gaonic
compel or not, or whether we advise him to give his wife a get, which is what Batei Din often do, or they recommend, but they're not going to, in today's terms, put him in jail. The innovation of the Gaonic enactment
is not only the element of compulsion, but its application immediately upon the wife's request for a get. According to
Chaim
Tykoczynski, Takanot HaGaonim Yerushalayim 1970,
page 15.
An additional reason for the takana was the fear that the mordot who were refused a get, might also become apostates.
So there we are. They might also become apostates. In other words, they go to the Muslim court gets them their get. They say, great, perhaps I'll become a Muslim too. All right. So all of this, though, shows that Rav Shiur Gaon was by no means browbeaten by the Gemara itself, by the discussion in the Sugya. For him, it was no problem to add to the list of husbands we beat up until they do what the rabbis say, the Moredet. Moreover, he makes no distinction between Ma'isalai or the wife who's angry with her husband. He says all Mordot. He's sensitive to what's happening. He explains why. The reason we want to do this is to avoid mamzerim, and therefore we are going to take this bull by the horns. We're going to force the husband in these situations to give his wife a get. Quite remarkable when you compare it to what happened later in rabbinic circles and courts. Okay, let's see. Shmuley, would you like to read, please, from line 38?
Some authorities accepted the Gaonic ruling in all cases, the Rif, the Rashbam, and the Mitrani.
Maimonides
Rules that only in the case of Maisalai do we compel the husband to divorce his wife immediately, since she is not a captive to be forced to have intercourse with a man she hates.
Rambam's line is very famous. Do you want to have a crack at the Hebrew, Shmuley? Haisha.
Haisha sheminiat ba'ala mitamshish
Tashmish Hamita.
Hamita, hi hanikrat moredet. ושואלים אותה מפני מה מורדת, אם אמר מעשה
Ma'astiu.
היה עליי, ואיני יכול להיבעל לו מדעתי, כופן אותו להוציא לשעתו, לפי שאינו כשבויה שתיבל לשנוי לו.
The sanuila. This is the line.
Sanuila.
She'ina kishvua,
Yeah.
she's not a captive. Shetiba'eva, she should force to have intercourse, lesanuila, to somebody who she hates. Okay? This is, as I said, this is the Rambam's view. He's not as large as the Rashbam or the Rif. He says it's only Maisalai. And also, he does say that she does forfeit her ketubah. Okay. Shmuley, she does, however,
Forfeit a ketubah. The 4-week and 12-month stages referred to in the Talmud only apply to the vengeful wife, and there is no compulsion option in her case.
this is the way the Rambam finesses it, okay? So his understanding of the sugya, and there are many different understandings. But this is
Right.
his more liberal view, that he says, okay, if it is a woman who really cannot bear to have a relationship with this man, then we do get her a get, force him, she loses her ketubah. The discussion in the Gemara in Ketubot about 4 weeks and 12 months is only the vengeful wife, when there is a possibility of somehow reconciling the couple. If she's taking revenge, if she's angry with him, perhaps we can get him to change his behavior, and then, because she's in principle happy with the marriage. Okay. So,
May I ask something?
sure, Jean.
I was not at the first minutes, maybe the 12 months what about to speak. This is on the page 64.
Ketubot, yeah.
And it seems, if I remember, that it is not in the case of the Moredet, but the case of Be'inale u'Metzarale. But in the case of the pure Moredet, as you say, then not only the Rabbeinu Rashbam, but Rashi himself in the Gemara in 63 B at the last, he said, Lo kalfinan le shahota, ela noten la get v'yotza b'lo ktuba. Donc Rashi says also that he gives her the get immediately, and lo kalfinan le means we don't oblige her to remain with him, but sous-entendu, we oblige him to give the get.
Anan kaifinan lei. We make him give her a get. That's what you read.
But apparently, Rabbeinu Shchira Gaon himself did not understand so, because he said that we don't give her the get only after. So there is a mixed match between the two types of
No. Rav Shira Gaon tells you what happened in the period up until his time.
Yes.
And his bottom line is we force the husband to give a get there and then.
Yes, but
Okay.
according to the Gemara, he says we don't oblige her. It's a
Correct.
Takana. Donc apparently, he did not understand this Gemara like Rashi.
And the Rambam is also different, as is Rashbam and Rif. We're not going to sort out all the different shitot now, okay? But certainly, as I said, in the beginning, we said there are different ways of understanding the sugya, both in terms of the periods of time and in terms of the kfiyah, terms of the compulsion. So I'm giving you briefly highlights. Rambam's psak is sensitive to the distinction between I want to make him suffer and ma'is alai.
Mm-hmm.
And Rambam says we do force him. He doesn't mention a time period, but he does say she loses her ketubah. So
Yes.
he would go along with Shura Gaon perhaps and say we force him immediately. But when it comes to the mitzaeret et ba'ala, the one who's taking revenge, then we talk about 4-week and 12-month stage, which
Okay.
makes sense because she's only taking revenge. She would remain in the marriage if he changed and stopped doing what's making him angry. So therefore, it's worthwhile having a period of cooling off and therapy. Okay? So Now,
Yeah.
it's interesting that Rambam continues to say something. Line number 9. Marcel, I can see you, so just give us line number 9, please. Maimonides adds.
Maimonides adds that the Gaonim had otherwise a dealing with the Moredet, but they did not spread throughout Israel, and many scholars disputed their innovations. We ought therefore to hew the Talmud and
Hew to
the Talmud and apply Talmudic law.
But of course, the Talmud is not clear. The question is which interpretation of the Talmud. But Rambam feels that the Gaonim were very independent and they felt that they could almost add to the Talmud. This was their status. Ian, would you like to read, please, line 12?
The main challenger to the Gaonic innovation was Rabbeinu Tam, who understood the Talmud to be opposed to compelling the husband to divorce any Moredet. He denied the authority of the Gaonim to implement a get that was invalid under Talmudic law. In his view, their authority to legislate creatively extended to monetary matters only. Sefer Yashar Tshuvot number 24. Rabbeinu Tam's solution was social ostracization of the husband, known as Harchakot de Rabbeinu Tam. No fellow Jew is allowed to speak to him, do business is sanctioned, do business with him, host him, give him food or drink, or even visit him if he is sick. However, no direct coercion of any sort is permitted in order to force him to divorce her.
So we have Shir Gaon, we have Rashi, Rashbam, a couple of other Rishonim, we have the Rambam, and then we have Rabbeinu Tam. Rabbeinu Tam, very powerful figure indeed. We'll look at some of his Tuvot perhaps. And he said he wasn't having a bar of this. He says no compulsion, not in the case of a Moredet. It's against the Gemara. The only cases you can compel the husband to give his wife a get against his will to make him say, I want to, is those 4 cases. And what you do best is social ostracization. Most halachic authorities. So, who is next? Menachem, Rona.
Yes, I am.
Would you like to read from line 20?
Most halachic authorities, including Ramban and Rosh, held that the Geonim did have authority to legislate on family law matters, but that this particular enactment was not to be followed because it was not sufficiently widespread and imposed a threat to the integrity of the Jewish marriage.
What's interesting is that the authority of the Gaonim to make takanot, to legislate, becomes a matter of dispute and question. The Gaonim had no doubt that they could do more or less whatever they want. They saw themselves as the spokespeople for the Babylonian Talmud. They understood how it worked, and their interpretation, understanding was the truth and the authentic meaning of the Talmud. But after they disappeared, okay, then there was a different view. Perhaps we should go back to the Gemara, and slowly the authority of the Babylonian Gaonim fell into disrepair as the other centers of Jewry became more learned, developed their own yeshivot, had their own rabbis, and then they said, why should we be bound by the Gaonim, especially when the Gaonim are not exactly on all fours with the entire Talmudic sugya.
So can I ask a question?
Is that Ian?
Yes, it is. Yes, yeah.
Absolutely. Ask away.
Well, so what happened to the Jews in Babylon after that? After they lost all their root leaders and they disappeared. Where did they go to?
The last Gaon was Rabbeinu Hai. We're going to come to him soon.
Hai Gaon, right?
Hai Gaon, yeah, he also lived a long time. He was Rav Shira's son, and he lived until 90-something, or the other they had the right genes for longevity. Okay, Shira and Hai. Hai is the last Gaon. And after that, the Gaonim become much less impressive. And according to the Sefer Kabbalah of the Ravid, Rav Shrir and Rav Hai are the last of the Gaonim. So if the Gaonim it happens like that all the time, Ian. You have a
What
group
happened
of
there?
rabbis who are
What happened there?
What happened was that the yeshivot of Shrir and Hai attracted students from all over the diaspora. Their tshuvot was sent to all over the diaspora. When Rav Hai died, there was a feeling his successor, or the man nominated to succeed him, was felt not to be as impressive by any way, a pale reflection of Rav Hai, and therefore support was withdrawn. And as I said, the centers were becoming, the diaspora was becoming more and more learned, more and more confident, and it was time for Babylon to lose its hold. It happens like that all the time, okay? So things change. Now, there were many, as they were, if I'll be rude, jumped up Geonim, both in Baghdad and in Eretz Israel, but they never got the authority of the Geonim of Bavel, and that whole line ended with Rav Hai. So, most halakhic authorities, okay, the Rosh. Robert, I can see you. Would you like to read? Line 24.
24. The
Yeah.
Rosh, well, you got to come down a bit. The Rosh wrote a lengthy responsum on this matter. In Ashkenaz, the Gaonic enactment is not accepted, and Rabbeinu Tam's position is the regnant one. What's regnant?
So, Ian, as we get into the 11th century, Ashkenaz becomes much more learned. Doesn't need Shuvot of the Gaonim, okay? They've been going for 400 years. Well, their time has come. Now we're going to argue. Rabbeinu Tam takes up his position, says no compulsion in the case of Moredet, and you have to use social sanctions because of the fear of get mu'aseh. Now the Rosh, 14th century, went from Germany, where he was a Talmid of the Maram of Rottenburg, to Spain, where he became a leading authority in Spain. He wrote Piskei Harosh of the Talmud, and he also wrote many, many Tshuvot. So first of all, he tells us about Ashkenaz, and now he explains why the Gaonic enactment was limited to their period and their time. Robert, the Gaonic enactment.
The Gaonic enactment, he didn't tell me what a regnant means.
Ruling, like,
Thank you.
Rain.
reign,
Which is
Regnant without the P, isn't it?
Rex Regin.
royal, rule, all of
Thank
that
you.
sort of stuff. Regnant, good.
Pregnant without
Interregnum.
the P.
The Gaonic enactment
Interregnum, yeah. Okay, the Gaonic enactment.
was a response to a specific social development which posed a threat to the Jewish community. Hence, they had to compel divorce. Times have changed, and the present-day threat is to the integrity of Jewish marriage by mordot, rebellious women probably, who simply wanted to ditch their husbands for more attractive men. Compulsion in this case would be extremely counterproductive.
So a lot depends upon the lens with which you view your society. If you're looking at the fact that frustrated women will find a way to get rid of their husbands and be traitors to Jewish law, then you might say, I don't want to have them do that, and I'm going to bend halakha. But if you say, I think the women are becoming lax, and they're no longer interested in marriage as it ought to be, they're losing their ideology, and they simply want to have lives with men they like, then we have to do the opposite, dig in our heels, and not allow them to get easily. Now, Va'odani Omer, says the Rosh HaGaonim shetiknu takana zo tiknua lefi hador hahu. It's a time condition, and we're going to see that in the Tshuvot more than once, that rabbis too can use sociology. Something was appropriate to one time, not appropriate to another time. And that is part of living halakha. When you decide that a certain halachic approach fitted a particular social context, and now this context has changed, maybe time for a different halachic approach. שהיה נראה להם לפי צורך השעה בשביל בנות ישראל. והעידנא, but today נראה הדבר להפך. בנות ישראל בדור הזה שחצניות הן. We've got feisty women, far too feisty. אם תוכל האישה להפקיע את עצמה מתחת בעלה באמרה, לא באין עליה, a woman can simply come to bed and say, I don't want him, don't live with him anymore, יצלו עיניהם באחר, then they'll be looking at other men all the time, וימרדו בבעליהן. על כן טוב להרחיק הכפייה. And therefore we do not compel in such cases. Okay, and what's interesting is that this view took on, and I hear Debbie saying it's still the case
today.
Today.
And this argument from the Roche is repeated generation after generation. And we must accept that it is very unfair for women because in the practice, it's just the contrary. It's the men who abandon their wives. But the case of the woman who is very seldom, I think.
I think that Debbie would certainly agree with you. Would you agree with Jean? Absolutely. She agrees with you absolutely. It's for everybody, of course, to think individually, but things changed, and I wanted to show the dramatic change from Rav Shiur Gaon to what happened afterwards. 14th century Spain. Jeff, I don't think you've read. Jeff Fisher. Line 1.
Even those communities that had a tradition of ruling in accordance with Rif and Rambam deviated in this context. In his classic Magid Mishneh on the Mishnah Torah, Rav Vidal de Tolosa writes, וכבר פשטה הוראת הזאת בכל ארצותינו שלא כדברי רבנו בזה.
And who is Rabbeinu?
Rambam.
Rambam. Exactly. Now, Vidal de Tolosa, Sephardi, Spanish, wrote the commentary. Magid Mishneh on the Rambam says, what can I do? The Rambam has been rejected by the majority of halakhic authorities. And of course, Jeff, this is also the position. The position.
I wanted to ask.
This is also the position view codified by Rabbi Yosef Cairo and Shulchan Aruch Ibn Ezel. And some illustration of this position may, however, be found in a ruling attributed to the Maharam of Rottenburg,
who is from Ashkenaz, but again a great responder and the leader of his generation with a large dose of self-confidence. So he could find a crack in this wall of opposition to ameliorating the Moredet, according to which
he would only relate to the wife's claim of a ma'is alai.
He would relate to Maisalai, which is better than Rabbeinu Tam, if she brought clear proofs.
She brought, yes, this is good.
If she brought clear proofs, ta'anot mevu'arot, of her husband's loathsome nature. It is, however, unclear whether Maharam was referring to get compulsion or to the financial sanctions level against the Moedet.
That will be her Ketubah and her Muzanot during the 12 months. In any case,
this statement provided support for later authority seeking to ameliorate her plight using other means.
Okay, before we read that, and I give you the example from Rav Kook, Jean, did you want to come back?
Yes, but I wanted to say that I had seen indeed there's a new book from Simcha Emanuel of all the Tshuvot of the Maharam Rottenburg, and I have seen exactly the same as we read here, that in the case of
Ma'is
arguments, he gave her the Ketubah.
Exactly. So the Maharam, again, if you have a very self-confident, authoritative leader of his generation, you can do something. Otherwise, it's very tough. But I wanted to bring a tshuva of Rav Kook, actually, and this is reflected somewhat in the practice of some Batei Din Rabbanim today in Israel, but you have to get the right one. She'af al pi, line 13, she'anu rushaynat set migidran sherov poskim. Hacholkim ala Rambam v'Rashi v'Rashbam, even though we are not allowed to follow the Rambam, Rashi, and Rashbam because most of the poskim do not hold like them. Disfira lohu kevatei de kofin legaresh b'ma'is alai, and if it's a case of ma'is alai, then you may force the husband to give a get. V'divreihem muvanim ma'od, and we understand, says Rav Kook, Hechi di'itnehu ta'anot tshuvot u'machriyot mitzad ha'isha kinidon dedan. But when we have a boilerplate, a cast iron case against the husband, he's a terrible man, okay? Mikol makom, mipnei chomer shetish einanu noagin lachuf legaresh. Still, we will not force him, compel him to divorce. Aval, mikol makom, מאחר שניצד הדין חייב הוא להוציאה מתחת ידו כסברת הרמב"ם. But we should apply the principle that the Rambam taught us. שלא תהיינה בנות ישראל כשבויות. בנות ישראל are not to be treated as prisoners. כיוון שהיא אומרת מעיס עליי בטענות מבוררות, that's where the Maram comes in, בטענות מבוררות. There's a clear case against the husband. והוא מעכב אותה, שלא תוכל להינשא לאחר, and he's preventing her from marrying someone else to get on with her life. שיפרנס ויזון אותה, and he also does not support her. ודאי דסברה אלימתא היא, it is therefore a strong svara, we have a strong basis, שצריכים לחייבו במזונות. What we do is we make him pay mezonot. Kedat kavod Torato, which is what the questioner wanted to do. Can I, in this period where she is a moredet, force him to pay her a large maintenance sum? And this is what I would recommend to be done. Now, the idea of enlarged maintenance, of course, is at the basis of what we call the PNA, the pre-nuptial agreement that we have today, where it's called Heskem Kedam Nisuin, Heskem Me'ahava. But the idea is that in cases where we cannot force a get, then we can at least get the husband in a situation where he's faced with a stiff financial penalty, okay, for not giving his wife a get. But it's not because he's being forced to give her a get, that would be get museh, because there is a fixed mezonot maintenance that he is not providing her with, therefore he is in breach of contract, and we can therefore sue him on that account. Now that in a very plain, simplistic way is what happens here. And what I wanted to do was to point up Rav Shiur Gaon and his view of the moredet, which you would not find in most of the contemporary decisions of Batei Din. It's been forgotten, more or less. But by the back door, we get into the moredet situation through the Maram of Rothenburg with Taunot, Muvurarot, and other means such as enlarged maintenance. So that's the picture of this particular tshuva. Another example of the absolute independence of the Gaonim compared to, if you like, the timidity of contemporary Batei Din is in relation to Hafga'at Kiddushin, that is annulment of marriage. And here we hit the last of the Gaonim, Rav Hai Gaon, and one of the absolute greatest. Alan, are you happy to read? From line 21, according to the Raivads.
No.
Alan Rockoff, are you connected?
Avi, okay.
Avi,
According-
sorry, I was just reading what was written on your box.
Not a problem, not a problem.
Exactly, Avi.
According to the Ravad Sefer HaKabbalah, Rav Hai Gaon was the last of the great Babylonian Gaonim. He was the son of Rabbi Shiur Gaon, and headed the yeshiva of Pumbedita from 986 when he stepped in to aid his ailing father a few years prior to the latter's death at the age of 100. An old tradition says that on the Shabbat after Rav Shiur's death, at the end of the Torah reading, the passage in Bamidbar in which Moshe asked for a suitable successor was read in honor of Rav Hai.
Actually, it was Shabbat Shuvah.
Mhm.
They didn't read, after Rav Shabbat Shuvah, they didn't read the Kriyat Torah of Nitzavim, whatever it was, or Kitavo. They read Parashat Pinchas because there it says, Yifkod Hashem Elohei Haruchot, Ish L'chol Basar, Ish Al Ha'edah. We're celebrating the fact that we now have a new Gaon. And it gets even more dramatic, okay? Thereupon,
as the Haftarah, the story of Shlomo's accession to the throne was read, and the last verse was modified as
Vayikruvu
follows.
Yemei David Lamut. And what does it say at the very end? Ushlomo yashav al kisei David, Aviv, vatikol malchuto ma'od. Okay, and what did they say all over the Jewish world when Rav Hai was appointed? V'hai yashav al kisei shira Aviv, vatikol malchuto ma'od. So that is also, Ian tells you how widespread the honor and respect due to these Gaonim was throughout the Jewish world. When the Rambam died, okay, or when the Rambam was alive, actually, it was only in Yemen that they added him into the Kaddish, or the Chayei HaRambam. But this was the entire Jewish world. Shabbat, Shuvah, they didn't do that Kriya of the Haftarah, they did something else. So, anyhow, read on. His chief claim, Avi.
And Hai sat on the throne of Shiur. His father and his government was firmly established. His chief claim to recognition rests on his numerous Responsa, more than 800 in number, in which he gives decisions affecting the social and religious life of the diaspora. Questions reached him from Germany, France, Iberia, Anatolia, and the Maghreb, and even India and Ethiopia. They deal with all aspects of Jewish law and lore.
Okay, so Menachem, we're back to you. Line 33.
33.
Yeah.
He wrote a number of treatises on Jewish civil law, including
HaMekach v'HaMinkar,
Mekach Minkar, Sefer HaMashkon, and Mishpatei HaTa'amim.
HaTunaim, laws of conditions. He wrote on laws of conditions. Sefer HaMashkon is on the law of guaranteeship, and HaMekach v'HaMinkar, which is famous, is the laws of sale. Because these are seminal figures in the formation of Jewish law. Also, Menachem, Rav Hai wrote.
Rav Hai wrote a Seder Tefillah, a commentary on the laws of Tefillin, and a commentary on the Mishnah, of which
only
fragments remain.
Okay. And more about Rav Hai Gaon. Ian, 1. Rav Hai strongly supported.
Rav Hai Gaon strongly supported Talmudic minhagim, and in many passages in his Responsa, he warns against deviating from a custom, even if the reason for its establishment has been lost.
And we think of the Gaon of Vilna. If it's in the Talmud, you got to do it. At the same time,
he opposed the ignorant practices common to his time, such as the practice of declaring null and void all oaths and promises which may be made during the coming year.
Kol nidre, haba aleinu. You can't cancel your vows in advance. There's a whole discussion of the right nusach for kol nidre. Rav Hai was dead opposed to the future annulment of vows and against the refusal
to grant an honorable burial to excommunicated persons and their relatives.
So that's just two details. Jeff, can you take over, please? An Arabic commentary.
An Arabic commentary on the Bible is attributed to him, as is a dictionary of especially difficult words in the Bible, Targum and Talmud, referred to as Ha-Ma'asef by Abraham ibn Ezra.
By Abraham ibn Ezra.
Yeah.
Michael, have you come across Gillis? Have you come across the Ha-Ma'asef?
Yes, I have.
Well, there you are. So Rav Hai Gaon. Okay. Now the Gaonim were authorities on everything. They explained the Talmud. They explained Hebrew. They were the fountain of all Jewish knowledge in their time. Okay. It is mentioned
by several rabbis in the 12th and 13th centuries.
Okay. In addition to, let's see, who else do we have here? Michael Gillis, in addition to
In addition to piyutim, still used in the Sephardi liturgy, he was the first to write Hebrew poems in an Arabic meter. His most famous poem is Musar Haskel, which consists of 189 Hebrew verses in the Arabic meter, known as Rajaz, hence the Arabic title Arjuza.
Exactly. Shmuley, Rav Hai was not only
a master of Hebrew law, but was also familiar with the Quran and the Hadith. He also refers in his writings to Plato, Aristotle, Al-Farabi, the grammarian Al-Khalil, the Septuagint, the Greek calendar, Greek history, and did not hesitate to consult the Assyrian Christians in an exegetical difficulty over Tehillim 1415.
So, Michael, you can explore that. Moses ibn Ezra.
In his poetic, calls him a mutakalam, testifying to his competence in the theological debates of the Muslims in his time.
And we remember Rambam in the Moreh Nevuchim taking issue with the mutakalam, okay? So he was a polymath, everything, of his own views on religious philosophical subjects. Jack, we're back to you, please. Line 18.
Of his own views on religious philosophical subjects, only those regarding the anthropomorphism of the Bible expressed in his appeal to well-known dictum of Rabbi Shmuel, the Torah spoke in the language of men.
He presages Rambam. When the Torah speaks about God having a body or moving a body part, it's all a metaphor because the Torah is to speak b'lashon b'nei Adam. And one or two other subjects.
Subjects, including divine foreknowledge and the predestined length of human life, are preserved in his Responsa. In general, he adopted a cautious view with regard to philosophical studies and sought to limit them to those who were both experts in Jewish law and lore and were proven to be steadfast in their faith.
Okay, so we get a picture of a broad scholar in many fields and a great authority on Jewish law. Bernie, line 25. We're into Kabbalah as far as the Kabbalah is concerned.
As far as the Kabbalah was concerned, Rav Hai only subscribed to those mystical ideas which could be traced to the Talmud. When the inhabitants of Fez made inquiries regarding the proportion of God's body, he answered that God is above any corporeal qualification and that the Talmud forbids the public discussion of these things.
We talked about Masechet Chagiga and Rambam in the Moreh Nevuchim, Maaseh Breshit, Maaseh Merkava. He designated as foolishness.
Designated as foolishness the idea found in later Kabbalah that miracles could be performed by using various permutations of so-called divine names. Quote, no sensible man will give any credit to purported accounts of any such miracles. Unquote.
So there. Okay, many of Rav Hai's responses deal with family law, and the following one demonstrates the legislative authority of the Gaonim, even in this area, and in particular, the strong measures they were prepared to take in order to ensure compliance with their takanot. Katav Rabbeinu Haizal, this is the tshuva. Havu yodim, no. Hefsed gadol etzlechem bazeh shesh lechem minhag lekadesh isha shelo b'shat haktuba. Rav Hai says, I don't like the fact that you are recognizing marriages without a proper ketubah. Although we all know and we all say all the time, if a woman puts out her finger and a ring is put on it and there are two witnesses and the guy who gives the ring says, Haret Mekudeshet Li, but Zokadat Moshe Israel, this is Kiddushin and she needs a get and all of that. Yesh b'minhag hazeh said, this is a bad way of doing things. Or mikuf shana, and in 100 years, lo nishma b'bavel kazot, we tolerate this not at all. Zero tolerance. Ve'en yodin kolika kiddushay isha ela b'shar ketubah. It has to be a formal ceremony with a ketubah at the same time. We're not recognizing any of these informal marriages, so-called. Uve Khursan in Khorasan, which is east, okay? It all sort of Afghanistan, Iran, Turkmenistan, different parts of Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Kazakhstan. Have you got all of that? Okay, that's Khorasan, as they say in Farsi. Hayami kama shani minhag lekadesh b'tabat b'moshav mishteh. They used to have a party, and the guy gave a ring, and everybody cheered and was drunk. And then the question, was she married, was she not married? That's how Davar Lev said, we don't want this to happen. We don't want to risk mamzerim or anything like that. Yehudai Gaon. And our ancestor Yehudai Gaon already made a takana, shelo yikatzu ela keseder Bavel. Babylon, the Geonim, 10 men, Tuba, Birchot ha-Erusin, and it's formalized. It wasn't formalized before. V'chol she'eino keseder hazeh, tiken lahen she'en chosheshim lo. And then if you do it, if you do a irregular marriage, what do we do? Hafga'inu Rabbanan l'kiddushin minei. Rav Hai had no problem about Hafgat Kiddushin, annulment of marriage, which we don't do today. We'll say the marriage was annulled. You disobeyed what the rabbi said in their takana. We're going to annul your marriage. Kol de mekadesh adata de Rabbanan mekadesh. Every marriage is based upon rabbinic approval. Rabbis withhold their approval. You ain't got no marriage. Afatem ru'yim l'salek min hakazeh. Get rid of this informal marriage thing. We annul the marriage. Hafga'at Kiddushin. The last word, we'll have the Scottish accent, please.
The
Michael.
authority of the rabbis to annul marriages became a highly sensitive matter over the ages, and we will track some of the milestones in the development of this topic in the Responsa literature.
And we is us in our shiurim, okay? Just so that should be clear.
Yes.
The unapologetic use.
The unapologetic use by the Geonim of annulment to provide their takanot with a strong sanction serves as an indication of the high level of their authority. In general, Rabbeinu Chai's Responsum affords an illustration of this halachic genre in the era of the Geonim, namely flexibility and independence in accommodating halakha to the complex realities of life in order to achieve a result which increases social harmony and the greater well-being of society.
So there, I'm going to stop the share, and we know, I mean, I can quote numerous sources, but already in the high Middle Ages, rabbis were saying we cannot annul marriages because we need all the rabbis to agree, and they don't all agree. We can only annul if we find authority for it, and there is a shemet shel get, there's some type of get involved, only in the cases in which the Talmud was prepared to annul, was we have to copy exactly. There's a famous tshuva of the Marsham, Harav Shalom Mordechai Brezhin, okay, on the case of a rabbi who mistakenly allowed a woman to remarry because he got a telegram from the Austro-Hungarian authorities that the missing husband's body had been fished out of the Danube. And what happened? He came back a few years later after she had remarried and had 2 children. Now, what's the din in such a case? Teitzei mizel vanea me'asheni mamzerim. How did the Maharam solve the problem? Next week at 8:45, I will let you know, and also show you why Hafgat Kiddushin, which Rav Hai was prepared to do, even in a case where they were not conforming with Babylonian practice that they'd instituted in the yeshivot and the whole of Bavel, You have to have an open ceremony in front of 10 men with Birchot Erusin and Ketubah, and otherwise we'll simply annul. Whatever you did is not correct. We outlaw it. You did it. Too bad, we're going to annul. We cannot do it today, but I'll explain to you a rare case in which it was done, but rare, and today we are pussyfooting around, of course, with the issue of Hafgat Kiddushin. Sorry, Deb? They do it occasionally, and we'll have Debbie come in next week and tell us when and where. Rav Ovadia has done a Hafgah or two, okay, but very rarely, and it could solve so many problems, because when you get a husband who won't give a get, you got a real problem. He needs to give the get willingly. But if the bet can come along and annul a marriage, you don't need the husband. You've bypassed him, and we need a husband bypass. Anyhow, all of that, beginning of the session next week, in Yirtzeh Hashem, Besorot Tovot, and Jean.
Look, at the first glance, this Hafgah in the Tshuva of Hafgah is not something extraordinary, because in all the many communities in Spain, apparently they did not know about this takana, and they decided also that when there were not 10 people and the agreement of the parents, there was not a Hafgah, but there was Hefker of the Kiddushin, and it was exactly the same, and maybe that was the Rav Gaon maybe did not think something more than Hefker Bezdin.
Abraham Chaim Freiman, in his book on Dinei Nisuin, deals with a lot of takanot, quasi hafgaot, but nothing as authoritative as the Geonim in their time. So I will bid everybody a good evening. Shmuley, would you please give me a call? And Jean, I'm going to reply to your comment about the Mumar by email.
Excuse me, I arrived a few minutes later because I'm a Chiyuv and I go to Minyan, and it takes me, they pray Marif at 7:30. It takes about 14-15 minutes, and I am leaving at 5 minutes of the Minyan. I cannot.